I'm sorry, my phone cut off. Let me continue where I was. And while I'm at it, let me plug in. Okay, so they went into the reptile house. Lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a trash can, but at the moment it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils of the snake. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned, and he shuffled away. Henry moved in front of the tank and looked intently, that means like really closely, at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except dumb people drumming their fingers on the glass trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on level with Harry's, and it winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anybody else was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake, and then he winked too. The snake jerked its head toward Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't really sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded its head vigorously. That means really fast. "Where do you come from, anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor from Brazil." Was it nice there? The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" So that type of snake comes from Brazil, but he was born at the zoo. So this snake had never been anywhere but the zoo in England where they were. As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley, come and look at this snake. You won't believe what it's doing." Dudley came waddling toward them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you," he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Ooh, caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast that no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next second, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering onto the floor. People through the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn he heard a low hissing voice that said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea, while he apologized over and over. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. They were like, As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels while it passed, but by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Piers was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming down enough to say, Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Piers was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go! Cupboard! Stay! No meals!" before he collapsed into a chair and Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a drink. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. By the way, do you know what a cupboard is? It's like a little closet. So is it a very big room that's fun to stay in? Does it sound like the type of place a boy should sleep? No. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet. And until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He'd lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursley were his only family. Yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. A tiny man in a violet top hat had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman dressed all in green had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. Very mysterious. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that old Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang of bullies. All right, that's the end of chapter 2. So strange things are happening. Harry Potter is now 10 years old, and his life is not awesome. He is not being treated well by the family that he lives with. I hope things get better for him. Do you think they will? I don't know. We'll have to find out. The next chapter, chapter 3, is called The Letters from No One. Dun, dun, dun. Students, I hope you have a magical weekend. I love you. Bye-bye.